Hello, 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 and welcome back to our weekly Sunday school lesson. I am Elder, Latanya Milliken of the All Nations Church in Oakland, California, and this is lesson 3 of our adult Sunday school. The date of the lesson is September the 19th, and we are in the book of Leviticus. We're still in Leviticus. We're highlighting today the 16th chapter, and we're doing a deep dive from the first through the 16th verse. The subject today is the Day of Atonement. And when you're thinking about holiness, because this quarter has been on holiness, this is a corporate holiness. And so I'm gonna jump right into it because this is a very detailed lesson. I'm going to ask you to pause and Google some images throughout the lesson so we can look at this together, and so you can refer to some of the images that we will be talking about or sharing in our lesson. So last week, or should I say the last 2 Sundays, because this is just the third lesson. The first lesson in our quarter, we walked through the ordination of high priest. The first high priest was Aaron, and we walked through his ordination and his son. So Aaron being the high priest and then his sons being priests. And I kind of described in detail the beautiful garments that they wore, or that they wear, or well, past tense, that they wore. And then in lesson 2, we learned of the demise of 2 of Aaron's sons, which were priests. And we learned that being a high priest, even though you're anointed, you are not immune from sinning, and you're not immune to the penalty from sin. And so God, in that lesson, demonstrated his holiness by judging the immoral deeds and the unwillingness of Nadab and Abihu in following his commandments. And so immediately after that lesson, immediately after the loss of their lives, the Lord instituted the Day of Atonement to avoid having that happen again. He instituted the Day of Atonement. So let's get in our lesson, because our lesson is about the Day of Atonement. And so at the beginning of the chapter, in the verse 1, the Lord speaks to Moses and instruct Moses to tell Aaron, don't go into the Holy of Holies any longer. Okay? So he was not to enter the holy place inside the veil. So now I want you to pause the video after I describe this and Google tabernacle. And so the holies of holies was in the tabernacle. There was this outer court, and inside the outer court they would do the sacrifices. But then there's also this small building, and in this little small building was so you go behind a curtain, and then you go into the holy place, and then inside and behind this veil was the holies of holies. And inside the holies of holies was the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. And so Aaron could not go behind the veil. So stop the video now and Google tabernacle and look at a couple of pictures and see what that veil is and where it's located. And then just come back to the video. And so now this warning to Aaron was again to avoid future tragedies. And so the Lord gave instructions to Aaron not to go behind the veil any longer unless he was instructed to do so. So that gives us this indication that potentially the Nadab and Abihu may have tried to enter the holies of holies. And that may have been one of the reasons why God judged them. Anyway, so moving on, and when we pick up, we're going to pick up on at verse 3 and 4. And I'm going to just kind of go through my details in my notes of what was required on the Day of Atonement, and the actual, okay. So the Day of Atonement was one day of the year where the high priest would enter the holies of holy, and offer a yearly atonement for the sins of the nation. And this was called Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. So it was one of the, one of the important holy days or holidays on the Jewish calendar. And so, again, once a year, this is when they will commune with God and their sins will be forgiven. And so when you, I'm gonna give you a little comparison here. So when you think about the old covenant was mediated by Moses. And the atonement, when Aaron would offer the sacrifice or the atonement, the remediation of sin. The atonement, it would just cover the sin. Now, in the new covenant, with Jesus Christ being the mediator, the atonement provided removes sin. So there's this distinction. It did not cover it like it did the old covenant. It removed the sin. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So Jesus Christ's blood removes sin. It was a full payment for the sin. Okay, so back to the Day of Atonement. So Aaron would meet with the Lord in the holies of holy, and he had to follow complete this. He had to follow the instructions completely. All right. He had to bring a bull for sin offering, all right, for cleansing, and then he had to bring a ram for a burnt offering to consecrate him. All right. He had to wear humble garments. He still had his linen garments, but they were different from his beautiful garment that I described in the first lesson, where we talked about the high priest garment with all the stones and the ephod. He didn't wear that. He wore something more humble before the Lord, and not the beautiful garment. And he had to wash completely. And he had to take a bath. He had to immerse his body into water before he put on his linen clothing and his garments. And so there was a difference. So when he worked in the outer court and did sacrifices, he only had to wash his hands and feet, and he had to wash that with the holy water. But in this, on the Day of Atonement, he had to do a full washing. Okay. And so we see in verse 5 and 6, the washing, after the washing, the people had to bring 2 goats, and the goats were for the sacrificing of their sins, the sins of the community. So you had the bull sacrificed for the priesthood, or the priest and his family, and the high priest and his family, and then you had the goats for the non-priest community. All right, and there was 2 goats. The one goat was for the sacrifice, and the other goat, both the goats had to be presented to the Lord. And then the Lord would determine which goat, the purpose of each goat. One was for sacrifice, and the other one was for scapegoat. Okay, so teacher, what do you mean by a scapegoat? You know what, did I ask you all to go? Okay, I'll ask you later. A scapegoat was one of the goats was released into the wilderness, and that symbolizes taking away the sin. So the sin's leaving. So one was for the sacrifice of the sins, and the other one was for the sins leaving. Now we pick up in verse 6 and 10, kind of gives you the details, give you all the little fine details of what the process was. Again, the sacrifice, they sacrificed the bull was for Aaron's sin and his family's sin. And after he did that, then he had to take in his censer. Remember last week we talked about the censer, right? The little incense burner. And Aaron had to take coals from the altar where they did the burnt offerings. And so when you looked at the picture that I asked you to Google, you'll see in the courtyard, inside the courtyard, you would see this sacrifice, this pit, if you will, where they would put the sacrifice. Well, Aaron had to take the coals from that pit, put it in his censer, all right, along with incense. And that incense and that combination would create this smoke. And he had to go inside behind the veil, and the smoke from the incense, and well, the smoke from the censer was a protection for Aaron, and it would create this smoke that would shield him from the presence of the Lord, because the presence of the Lord was holy. And so I want you to Google. I want you to pause the video now, and I want you to Google mercy seat, the mercy seat, the mercy seat. Stop the video and Google mercy seat, and then come back. The mercy seat, if you're back now, it was, okay, so the mercy seat sat on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And inside the Ark of the Covenant was the remnants of sin. It was kind of like this reminder of the sin of the nation of Israel. So you had this manna, and I believe was a plate, if I remember, because I taught the book of Leviticus. And there was manna was in there, and that manna represented their complaining in the wilderness. Also was the tablets of stone with the 10 commandments inscribed in them. And then lastly, it was Aaron's staff, and the Aaron staff had budded, and it represented the rebellion, if you will, of the sin, the rebellion of sin from the nation of Israel. And then, I want to make sure So that's that. This is what I wanted to share with you. Okay, so that was in the ark. So you had the ark, and no one could touch the ark. If you noticed, if you saw it, that it had poles on it, so they had to carry the poles. And if you touched it, you just immediately died. And then on top of that was the mercy seat, and then there's this 2 cherubims, 2 angels, and in between the 2 angels, like this is an angel and this is an angel, in the middle was the presence of the Lord. That's where he would be. Okay. And so Aaron had to have the smoke to protect him in the censer. Okay. And then after he did that, then he had to present the goats, make the sacrifice for the goats, and then one of the goats was a scapegoat. We talked about that. Now I want to give you sort of a distinction between when we talk about Aaron's role as a high priest. Okay, I'm gonna get a little away from the sacrifice and talk about the high priest. So Aaron was a high priest. He was the first high priest, but Aaron still committed sin. Versus Jesus being the great high priest, He committed no sin. All right. Being the high priest, Aaron being the high priest did not immune him from committing sin as well. So he had to offer a sacrifice for his sins. Before he could offer a sacrifice for the people, he had to offer a sacrifice, the bull, for his own sin. Then he could offer a sacrifice for the people. And this is something he had to do repeatedly. Like this was an annual event. And so Aaron was a type and shadow of Christ. And he served as a high priest. Now, the distinction between Aaron and Jesus is that Jesus did not offer a sacrifice. Jesus was the sacrifice. Jesus gave himself as the sacrifice for all people. All right? He did it once. That was permanent. It atoned for sin. It did not cover sin. It removed sin. And whosoever believe on him can have their sins forgiven. And Jesus Christ, as the great high priest, supersedes Aaron as high priest. And so then so that's kind of the details of our lesson today. I just want to make sure I don't forget anything. Oh, a few more things. And so after the sacrifice, then Aaron had to take the blood. He had to dip his finger in the bull's blood and sprinkle it 7 times on the mercy seat. And then he had to, of course, sacrifice the goats for the sin of the people, and then sprinkle the goat's blood in front of the mercy seat. And this made the atonement, and the sprinkling made the atonement for the holy place and for the tabernacle because of the sins of Israel. And that's our lesson today, but I'm going to kind of give you, go on, glasses. I'm going to give you the conclusion and help and kind of connect you with next week's lesson. So let's talk about what was the aim of this lesson. The aim of this lesson is to illustrate. Okay, there goes a scratchy voice. So the aim of this lesson is to illustrate the amazing grace, mercy, and forgiveness of the Lord. The Lord does not want us to live in sin and not have a way for our sins to be forgiven. The principle of the lesson is to learn crucial aspects of the atonement and the forgiveness in order to gain a greater appreciation for God's holiness and mercy. And the application of our lesson this week is to properly view God's forgiveness and holiness in perfect balance, understanding both our responsibilities to God's holy standards and his merciful ways. And lastly, the conclusion. Okay, I think we're learning that God expects us to follow his instructions, and we cannot come to him the way we want to. We have to come to him with a clean heart, and we have to, again, follow his instructions. And so the actual conclusion of this lesson, God's forgiveness and holy requirements are balanced perfectly in Leviticus 16. We see his forgiveness in his specific dealings with Aaron, his allowance of the scapegoat, and his atoning provisions for the high priest himself. God's holiness is also displayed in the Day of Atonement, as indicated by the importance of complete obedience to God. As we seek to live out our faith, God's forgiveness and holy standards give us much needed guidance and assurance. So next week, we will be in Leviticus 24, 10 through 23. We will learn more about God's holiness and the grave danger of taking it lightly. Let's see what happens next week. Thank you for joining me. God bless you. Bye-bye.